Hello there. In this episode, number 23, I shall be discussing the reign of King William II. William was the third of four sons of William the Conqueror. The eldest son, Robert, became the Duke of Normandy in 1087 upon the death of William the Conqueror. The second son, Richard, had in fact died in the New Forest in 1075, which is foreshadowing, and the youngest brother, Henry, would actually succeed William II in 1100. Not all too much is known about William's upbringing. We do know that William and Henry were quite close, and one time they did conspire, and they succeeded in pouring a chamber pot full of poo on the head of Robert, who wasn't entirely happy about this. It's probably too much for a stretch to say this was symbolic of their relationship, but yeah, Robert didn't really get on with William, and neither did he get on with Henry, especially when both William and Henry were kings of England. So I think there's definitely an element of sibling rivalry and jealousy there, especially directed towards Robert. So when William did accede the throne in 1087, he was King of England, but as I've mentioned, he was not Duke of Normandy. They were not the same person anymore, and members of William the Conqueror's government, such as Odo Obeo, who had basically acted as regent for William when William the Conqueror was off fighting in Normandy, thought this was really stupid, the fact that the Duke and the King were not the same person, because of all the land issues, the fact that in one territory, England, you had to swear allegiance to one king, and then in Normandy you had to swear allegiance to another, different tax codes, etc., etc. As I said, in William I, the polities were not united, so there was no kind of united currency or anything like that. So Odo thought this was silly, so he decided in 1088 to organise a rebellion in the name of Robert, but Robert didn't get the memo. He didn't turn up to his own rebellion, which meant Odo sort of got pie on his face. He was sent into exile, and I think in 1097 went on a crusade with Robert. So that wouldn't work out too well. In terms of the rest of his reign, in terms of the sort of administrative power aspect of his reign, William II was fortunate to have inherited the feudal system that had been embedded under William the Conqueror's reign. England was the most centralised state in Western Europe, and this was kind of gained through having a loyal chancery, which a chancery is sort of an office where letters are written and decrees are sent out quite effectively. And this was very, very loyal to the king. So that was very useful in getting the centralised state in place. Plus they had the Doomsday Book, which had literally just been completed as William acceded to the throne in 1087. So he knew exactly who to tax, he knew exactly own what, and exactly who to remove and what people were basically doing. So that was very useful to him as well. So this gained lots of prestige. And he, in order to celebrate this, he decided to build Westminster Hall, which is the oldest part of the Houses of Parliament, partly because the Houses of Parliament were burnt down quite a few times, and Westminster Hall was deemed to be the most valuable part of it because it was the oldest. So that was William II's invention. So when you visit Parliament, the first thing you see when you go inside it, apart from the security bit, is Westminster Hall. So yeah, that's pretty cool. In terms of his church relations, he quarrelled with a new Archbishop of Canterbury he appointed called Anselm, who you might have heard of. Anselm was very in favour of something called the Gregorian reforms, which basically, among other things, was about the clergy being appointed by the king. So the Pope Gregory wanted the clergy to be appointed directly by the Pope in any country, any Catholic country, whilst William wanted power to remain in his own hands and not in the hands of Rome, which sounds very Henry VIII-ish, to be honest, obviously 500 years before. But yeah, so William quarrelled with Anselm because Anselm wanted allegiance to the Pope rather than allegiance to the king. So Anselm eventually went to the Pope, Urban II, who it now was, but Urban, who was fighting against the anti-Pope, I think Henry IV of the Holy Roman Empire, decided to support William, who would basically legitimise Urban's rule, and then in exchange make sure that William was able to appoint his own clergyman. So Anselm lost out on that one. Yeah, and as I mentioned with Henry VIII, as I said, it sounds a bit like Henry VIII, and a big theme throughout these, for the next probably 600 years of these reigns, podcasts, king-church relation, the relationship between the crown and the church, you're going to be of quite vital importance. Not in terms of how the history is written. I mean, that's one aspect, but obviously, especially with Henry II, with Thomas Becket, Henry VIII, with basically everyone, there were just huge religious issues. So that's a big theme that's coming up. In terms of his foreign policy, he was able to beat the Scottish at the Battle of Alnwick, which I think is in Northumbria, in 1093, killing King Malcolm III, and with the help of Edgar Etheling. So Edgar's still around, which I find quite curious. Actually helping his Norman masters who deposed his royal house, but hey ho. And they managed to install Duncan as king, who then paid homage to William. So there was quite good influence there for the English crown, and it still showed that it was really the predominant force in the British Isles still. So as I mentioned earlier, Robert, the Duke of Normandy, went on crusade in 1097 with Odo. Again, the Crusades are a bit of a common theme as well for the next 200 years. William became the regent of Normandy and campaigned in France against the French king. He took Maine, and he was very busy in that regard. And he probably would have done more. I think he was planning the invasion of Aquitaine, but he died in 1100 of a hunting accident, in inverted commas, in the New Forest in 1100. When the arrow hit him and he died, the nobles abandoned his body, which is a little bit fishy, and he was actually found by a peasant. His younger brother Henry was declared the king very hurriedly, which again suggests some kind of collusion, but you can't quite be sure whether it was an assassination or not. William II was buried at Winchester, which is different to his father. His father, I think, was buried in Rouen Cathedral in France, but the bones got scattered due to the French Revolution, I think. Church was very happy that William died as well, and I think a lot of the people were quite happy too. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes William as hated, and as I mentioned, it might be because he had bad relations with the church, and obviously the church wrote the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and the history. But he was quite brutal in his reforms and not very subtle about it. So I guess that's one way to assess him, especially in comparison to Henry, who I'll talk about in the next time. He was a good soldier, however, which is perhaps why he stayed in power for quite long. He was admired in that regard. The only other thing that's quite interesting to know about him is that he may have been gay or he may have been sterile, because he didn't marry, had 13 solid years, and indeed time before that, to marry and have kids, but he didn't. So who knows why that really was. And plus, also, he did succeed William the Conqueror, who's quite a titanic figure, really. That shadow is going to cast quite long. There's something really William II could have done with that. So there we go. That is William II's reign for you. I'll see you next time in King Henry I's. Goodbye.